Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Kennedy Report. I'm Kennedy Hall. I'm here with special guest. You've probably maybe read his articles at 1 Peter 5, Mr. Joe Boca. He's been on Mr. Tim Gordon's show before. He's probably ticked you off on Twitter, and he's here to help because that's actually his name on things, right?
It's listed right there at here to help 188. Yeah, there's like half a chance that if you've come across me on Twitter that I've annoyed you a little bit, but that's what I'm here for. Keep things keep things fresh, keep you on your toes, keep myself on my toes.
That's good. Well, we're gonna annoy everybody. We're gonna annoy everybody today. Maybe not. So we're gonna talk about problems in the traditional movement. And before we even get to that, first, I always forget to do this. Please like this channel. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, click the notification bell, links in the description, yada, yada, yada. You've heard all the things. What do the YouTubers say? Smash the notification bell, smash that like button. I don't know. So do that. It's very helpful to us to keep this going. And thank you for all your generosity thus far to everyone who supports the channel. In addition, a little proviso on the positions that we're going to have here, the ideas. None of what we're saying about problems in the traditional movement have anything to do with the official positions of traditional theologians. So, for example, we're not, you can see behind Mr. Boca there, he's got our guardian angel watching down on us. We've got Marcel Lefebvre there. And we are both Marcel Lefebvre partisans. We've both written apologetics for the Society of St. Pius X. There's no secret with that. So this is not about the positions of the SSPX. We agree with everything. What we're talking about here is in the traditional movement writ large, largely from online interactions, that there are things that we think could be improved upon to help people come to tradition. Is that fair, Joe?
Yeah, I think that's right. And specifically what you said, what we're not referring to is what the society says on paper, and most importantly, what the institutional church says on paper, right?
That's right.
So the whole point is that this is not a question of faith and morals.
That's right.
And the problem is, and I think we'll get into this, and we probably agree that this is one of the bigger problems, that we oftentimes see, and I'm probably guilty of it myself under certain circumstances, but we see lots of nuanced, niche opinions being bandied about as though they were de fide or matters of faith and morals or matters of doctrine and matters of dogma, so on and so forth, when they're really just glorified opinions.
Yeah, and I have a list here of 3 of my things, and you probably have a similar one. I think we could springboard off, and one of those will be dogma that's not dogma. That's kind of how I put it out. But so also, when we talk about traditional movement, this is a very big tent kind of term, because on the one hand, there are folks who attend a traditional parish, and sacraments always traditional and so forth. But then there are many people who don't have access to those all the time and are trying to be traditional because they have the faith. They know the traditional faith is the faith of all time, and they're sort of trying to put pieces together as much as they can. And so I would include people like that as traditional Catholics, because it's a traditional minded thing. Geographical locations sometimes are not very ideal, and you can't get all the things that you want, but think like a traditional Catholic is the point. And then I would also say there are people who are very curious, and this is the main reason why I think one of the main reasons you and I have talked about this a lot on text and things like that. One of the reasons we're so not concerned, like, I don't want to sound like a liberal, I'm concerned with your behavior. No, like, one of the reasons we're so why it matters to us is because we know tradition is the best. We know that the future of the church is in the past, if that makes sense. So we want tradition to be as appealing as possible. And pretty much everything I'm going to talk about kind of actually has to do with online interactions, and not with nothing to do with my chapel or anything like that. Nothing to do with individual persons. But the reality is that most of our interactions this day and age are online. So if we don't clean up our act online, then I think there's a lot of souls who think, well, I'd like to go to the traditional chapel down the road, but but I saw these guys yelling at each other about whether or not it's a sin to wear shorts. And I, don't think that I want to be a part of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, certainly. One of the recent debates on it was short, like it didn't blow up or anything like that, but the you'll see like the issue of it ends up being like reoccurring stuff, like shorts, whether or not women could wear pants in general, the tattoo question. Like I have 5 tattoos myself, and
So you're a heretic, is what you're saying.
right, exactly. I'm a heretic apostate kind of
Yeah.
all the above. So what and you have a mix of people on Twitter of like I've been going to Latin Mass. I've been attending the SSPX for 9 years in August, right? But
Right.
not everybody's like me, and not everybody's like you, and not everybody's been doing this for a while or their whole life. You have people that are newly curious to the whole thing. I've seen it a lot. I've especially seen it since the Shia LaBeouf thing. So like that's like genuinely renewed a lot of interest in the Latin Mass and stuff like that. And I think like, okay, so if somebody's on Twitter and that's kind of where they're getting the first whiff of traditional Catholicism is online, you'll see a mix of the goodly spirit of Shia LaBeouf and that kind of genuine seek and you shall find curiosity blended with Puritanism is so overused as an insult, but it's still valid because it's because of how big the traditionalist movement is in America.
Right.
Puritanism is basically in the air we breathe, so we end up spiraling in that very particular fundamentalist Protestant kind of way. So, and I think people will end up thinking to themselves, well, okay, if I have a couple of tattoos, does that mean I can't go? Does that mean I'm some kind of like, does that mean I'm out permanently? Because people, they don't know what to make of it because it's foreign.
What's funny about tattoos? So yeah, we'll get to our, this is good because we'll get to our list because we're kind of, we have to go into depth on all these ideas because there's so much there. And I wrote a couple things down on what you just said because it was a couple more things. So being black-pilled and resentment, and we'll get to that. But it's funny with the tattoo thing. So I have over on my shelf over there, The Glories of Mary by St. Alphonsus of Liguori. I've never read the whole thing, but I've just kind of read parts of it.
Right.
And one of the parts I was astonished because if there's any moral theologian that, if not properly read, could influence someone into a scrupulosity or Puritanism, it would be Alphonsus Liguori. I mean, he's very harsh on a lot of and I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying, and I'm using the term properly read, right? He's one of many incredible moral theologians. And he wrote with a certain style and spirit. And if you don't understand that, then it can come off as people can take certain things in the wrong way. But one of the things he does say, as if it's fine, is he talks about these men who are, professed religious, who are so devoted to Our Lady that they brand themselves. He says they mark themselves with cutters or something like that. Basically, he's referring to tattoos. They basically brand themselves with holy words and references to the Blessed Virgin Mary. So it's actually funny. And in the moral theologian that you would probably appeal to the most as the most sort of traditional Puritan type, if that's the simplistic way of looking at it we're going to use, even he would actually talk about it's not intrinsically evil to mark your body. In the Old Testament, when they talk about a prohibition against tattoos, they're obviously talking about a certain type of pagan practice, okay, and self-mutilation as well, and that's a very different thing. So, tattoo question aside, I think it's an up in the air. I don't have any tattoos, but this idea that you couldn't, I think, is kind of absurd. If it's not mutilating, I mean, especially modern techniques, you're not mutilating yourself. And then I guess if it's vanity, that's your own problem. That's not really the problem of the ink, if that makes sense. So anyway, okay, so let's get into our list here. Number 1, dogma that isn't dogma. Here's what I mean by that. So I'll give you an example. I am basically a young earth creationist. Okay. I just am. For scientific reasons and also religious reasons. Now, of course, my initial curiosity into looking into the ideas of the creationist scientists, if you want to call them that, was because I was looking.
You muted, Kennedy.
How long did I just mute myself right now?
For like 15 seconds.
Oh, okay, yeah, I accidentally pressed my MacBook there. So I was saying, these sensitive mics or these mouse pads. So I was looking into creationist scientists because I wanted to see if it made any sense. And then when I saw that, I was convinced by their actual evidence that I thought, okay, this is actually worth a second look. And then from there, I sort of looked into the depth of how the church fathers and so forth have talked about Genesis and creation and that sort of thing. I became convinced that the world is like less than 10,000 years old. People may disagree, but at the same time, I understand that there is room for nuance when you read Augustine and so forth about, how do we even understand time? Could it happen in a moment that's instantaneous, but appear to us like it was a long time? These really are mysteries. So my whole point with this is, I think the evidence is overwhelming that, that the church fathers are on the side of more of a young earth, more literal than not in Genesis. But I understand that much of it has never been defined, and much of it can never be defined, because the simple fact that, for example, in the Christmas liturgy, right, you use one translation of the Bible that says, 5,525 years after creation, we have that. And then when we have other traditions, it's 4,000 years after creation. Even there's a discrepancy within the small t traditions of the church. So if I went to the point where I was anathematizing somebody and called him a modernist because he believed in an ancient earth, that would be me dogmatizing something that's not dogma. And quite frankly, it's unfair, and I don't have the right to do it. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I seen this manifest in a particular instance, that question. I don't know if you recall, Father Paul Robinson of the SSPX wrote a lengthy book on adjacent questions, scientific questions, like questions of Earth, The Realist Guide to Religion and Science. I'd never read it, but it did spark a lot of debate because Father, being faithful to the church's methods, basically, did not shut. It's my understanding that he didn't completely shut out the question of an old Earth and things of this sort. He didn't bind the faithful to anything, because that's not what the church does on questions of natural sciences. Yeah. So, but it did infuriate a lot of what would be traditional Catholics who affiliate with or take a more young Earth view, which is fine. I have no issue with that view. I don't particularly have one. I'm kind of agnostic on the question because I haven't done the research. But so that caused quite a stir, and the people that criticized Father, I wouldn't name anybody, but made it as though he were some kind of
heretic.
Correct. For even mentioning that's not that it's even a possibility, but that it's an acceptable opinion to take another tact other than the fact that, say, it's 4,000 years old or whatever. And they want to make it as though it was something that is of unanimous consent of the fathers, which we know is, if it is, then it's basically de fide. But if you read the last couple of chapters of the Confessions, you know that Augustine does leave it open for interpretation, and as such, that's not consensus of the fathers. But I actually presented that, I was just like, hey, here's the text, to somebody that was on that side, and they quite simply have no answer. And I do understand it. People want, so you have,
there are three fathers, I think. It's Augustine, Clement of Alexandria, and Origen, I think, that are more agnostic about the age of the Earth. I think that's the case. Anyway,
that sounds right.
Yeah.
And so now I don't want to like come down hard on the people that are condemning things like this, the dogmatic young earthers, just to refer to them as, uh, because we live in weird times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we live in confusing times, and most people are going to associate that with naturalist tendency, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Darwinian atheism, basically. So their gut reaction is to reject, which is, I think, if you're rejecting it under the terms of you're rejecting atheism, I understand that.
It's a
And
healthy sentiment in its root, I think.
right,
Yeah.
but at worst it's an overcompensation,
Yeah.
and you end up putting your opposition that isn't really opposition in a camp that they don't belong in. And
Yeah.
we look, and people are now looking to the church and the traditionalist movement for clarity and certainty on matters that the church just never provided that for, that because it wasn't, the church didn't view it as its domain, per se, strictly speaking.
Listen, I've done a lot of work. I'm basically young Earth creationist. I think evolution is nonsense and so forth for strict scientific reasons and philosophical reasons, even before
Yes.
religious reasons, right? I personally think it's just when you follow all the logic through, I think it's absurd. However, if you read Ludwig Ott's Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma, which is probably the best resource we have for things that are de fide, meaning of the faith that we have to believe, it has a perfect explanation of the theological notes, what is actually binding, what is debatable, what is merely opinion, and so on and so forth. It's de fide. Adam was especially created, Eve created from Adam. God created all things out of nothing, that sort of thing. But there is no de fide teaching on the age of the earth. There's just not. And I don't think there can be. And I've actually thought about this because, in all of my research into this topic, I realized just how, what's the word I'm looking for here? Just how little, how minuscule the amount of information we could even ever know about the creation of the world. Even if we knew Genesis to be literally true in literally every aspect, and not some of it being metaphor and so forth, even if that were the case, it would be 1/1000% of what actually happened. Because, you have aspects of, explain the mechanism of how the trees came out of the pod that grew and how long did that take? I mean, there's just like, there'd be a zillion things that you would never know. So part of me thinks it's, there's almost like a divine intention or something like that to say, we're going to leave some things mystery. And as Lefebvre says in his book, Spiritual Journey, I think it's the last thing he wrote, and he talks about Genesis, and he literally just says, we believe this with simple faith. There are just things that we have to believe, and that's all we can know, and everything else, you can spend your time. Philosophers can debate how many angels dance on the head of a pin, and they can go crazy and lose their minds. So, okay, let's move on to our next topic, because we're already a third way through our show and through one of our topics. Okay, here's the next one. I'm gonna put these two together: negativity and resentment. Now, I'm not saying this in a psychoanalytical way about any particular person, but here's the reality. It makes perfect sense that in discovering traditional Catholicism, you would experience a lot of negative emotion, which could lead to resentment. I've been there. Okay, and here's why. When you find traditionalism, especially if you're looking for it from the Novus Ordo and so forth, when you find traditionalism, what do you discover? You discover that you've basically been deprived. You discover that you've basically been lied to. You discover that, Protestants were consulted on how to make the liturgy that, almost made you leave the church. You discover the way Lefebvre was treated. You discover the lies about Fatima. I mean, you discover all these things, which are legitimate negative realities. And you find that there were Freemasons naming bishops in the 1980s. I mean, you find all this stuff and you go, whoa, this is crazy. Look at all these bad things that have happened. And you can't really separate those things from tradition in a sense, because that whole spirit of modernism and Freemasonry and Protestantism within the church, that has been the suppressing driving force against traditionalism. So you can't really separate them. I get why that's there. But then you run the risk of seeking and embracing traditionalism from a perspective, from a negativity position, meaning I am traditional because I'm anti Novus Ordo. I am traditionalist because I'm anti new mass, new paradigm. Now, I am against the Novus Ordo for theological reasons, but I don't go to, I mean, I endeavor not to. I try not to go to the traditional mass and say and I don't want to be like the Pharisee and the publican. Is that yeah. So, he says basically, Lord, thank you for not making me like him. Right. That's a really easy temptation. Look at me. I'm at the traditional mass and I'm so lucky to be here because what I'm doing is so much better than what they're doing at the Novus Ordo parish down the road. That's a really, I mean, these are scriptural things. This is a super simple temptation. It's super common and it will lead to a resentment of fellow Catholics just because they don't go traditional Catholicism. And it will lead to an unhealthy resentment. Even if a hierarch is bad, if you resent him and you hold on to that, it's actually very spiritually dangerous. Okay. So I think negativity and resentment are sort of two sides of the same coin of a really bad trap for traditional Catholics. And if I'm outside looking in, if I'm a guy who listens to Pints of Aquinas and I'm into the traditional theological things, and I'm like, okay, I'll look into this old liturgy thing. And then I go online or Instagram, Twitter, or whatever, and I find a bunch of people with like Pepe the Frog meme things, which are hilarious. But if I'm like, I go on and I'm bombarded with like, hey, you know how I know you're an idiot? You go to the new mass. And it's like, that's just a problem and it's going to drive people away. What say you?
Yeah. Funny you mentioned Pepe the Frog. So there's a like a phrase on the internet. The Pepe is associated with the anonymous Twitter account or Anon, right? Anon. So I think about, look what they took from you, Anon, right? And then you see the traditional Latin Mass, you see the habited nuns with school children, you see the priests in their cassocks, and you see all these old pictures, and it's very easy to see that, then see what we have now in the rectories and all that, and that's an understandable black pill for sure. So what do you do? I mean, I've literally had people ask me. So it's like, well, what do you do? It's being defined by what you're not. So like you said, anti-Novus Ordo, anti-Vatican II, anti-this, anti-that. I have problems with Vatican II. I have problems with the Novus Ordo by the letter. However, just being somebody who rejects is it's a kind of an atheistic paradigm, because what are atheists, right? They're people that are defined by the fact that they don't believe in God.
Yes.
So insofar as traditionalism is just anti this and anti that, it's kind of like a vacuum of goodness. You just you'll get a bunch of people that just kind of complain constantly. And what I explain to people that are curious, or what I've basically had to explain to myself on occasions, right, is, man, the traditional Latin Mass seems cool. I love the church's intellectual tradition, all that, the church's aesthetic tradition. But man, the people seem miserable, and it's and I had somebody just say to me yesterday, traditionalists aren't the best, don't lay out the welcome mat very well, and it's true. What I would say to the person who's curious is like, well, yeah, they don't. It's true. You say, you confirm that the traditionalists do have a hard time doing that, and then acknowledge that it's also true. So two things could be true at once. That traditionalists, especially the older ones, the ones that lived through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, up till around Summorum Pontificum, and now we're kind of going back into it after Traditionis Custodes. They were beat up on for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And if you're beat up on for 2 decades, and you're having to go to your mass in a weird part of town, at a weird time, then you become a little jaded, and it's understandable given the historical circumstances. But what especially as a younger generation, which you're a part of, I'm a part of, you have this good opportunity to for my Jocko Willink fans, to take extreme ownership of what you're doing. And that's another thing when people, what do we do? It's like, you do it right yourself. You know what I mean? Who cares that, John Q. Trad is miserable or whatever? Let him be miserable. Maybe, and pray for him. But what you could do is you can, if you have a family, you could raise a happy family. You could pray with them and teach them the beauty and the goodness of it, and cultivate too, which I think helps with this stuff, is cultivate your own natural virtues, because I think a lot of the desolation and resentment, as far as I could tell, comes from an area of weakness, not that we don't only see in traditionalism, but Christianity writ large, is you have a lot of weak men, so they'll, it's like, well, I pray the rosary, I do this, I do that, I read I read 100 pages of St. Thomas Aquinas a day. I'm good. I've read all the papal encyclicals. It's like, nah, dude. It's like, that's great, but like, go for a walk. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I mean, don't put the cart before the horse. Like, if you can get off your rear end. I'm not saying you got to. I train jujitsu. I lift weights. I do all that stuff. I'm not saying you have to do that. You probably. I mean, if you can, you probably should. But just do something other than focusing on this stuff constantly. There was a good anecdote. I don't know if it's true, but it's true, and it's true in spirit. So a person, goes into the confessional. It's been struggling with the sin, and they're like, losing their mind, and they say to Father, what spiritual book do I have to read? What Life of the Saint do I have to read? And what spiritual author do I have to read? And the priest says to them, you have to read. You should read Dickens. And it's like, Charles Dickens. Why? He's like, because you have to learn how to be a human before you learn how to be a saint.
Yeah, that's really good. That's excellent. There's an old anecdote, small T tradition from the time of the apostles. And it's like a Saturday afternoon or something, and St. John tells his disciples, "Let's take a break. Let's play some sports. Let's recreate. Let's have a picnic," sort of thing. And they say, "Well, there's souls that need to be saved. We need to be evangelizing and stuff." And he says, "What happens when you pull a bow too tight? It breaks, and it can't do its job, right? You got to relax." I will say though, my experience has been different than the miserable thing. Maybe it's because where I live, I would say half of us are recent traditionalists, probably in the last 5 to 10 years. So it's actually been extremely welcoming. Sure, I mean, that's baseline, but just we're in a building. We're in our community. We're in a constructive building kind of era. Like we had a small chapel and it's growing, and we need to expand, and more priests are coming, more vocations. Like it's this period of growth. So because of that, it's almost like, come on. But within that, you mentioned earlier the debates about can men wear shorts? Should women wear pants? I don't think women should wear pants. But I don't think that we need to present that to everybody who walks in the door. Because listen, somebody has just discovered the beautiful mass and they're having an experience. It's like, calm down. Maybe after you become friends, first of all, people just start to change their habits when they attend tradition, because you get recalibrated as a person. I mean, debate about pants and stuff aside, there's no modesty in the Novus Ordo. There's no modesty in the Novus Ordo because it's not a modest liturgy. And what I mean by that is everything is on display. There is no secretiveness. There is no sacredness. Everything's loud. You can see everything. Nothing's covered. Nothing's hidden. Nothing's veiled. So that's reflected in the people, right? It's reflected in, and especially in women, because the church is the bride of Christ. So it makes total sense that the brides in the bride of Christ would imitate the presentation of the bride of Christ in the way that they carry themselves. So you find when you go to a traditional setting that women just automatically start to become more modest because it just makes sense. It's just like, and then, you almost get recalibrated. One of the things I thought was so great being a traditional Catholic for a few years now is even me as a man, I've been recalibrated in how I see feminine beauty because of the experience of being in the traditional setting. And it's just so much more, perfected when it's in traditional way. That being said, someone walks into your chapel saying, here's a book called Dignity and Dress, or what's that famous one? Dressing with Dignity. That's probably not what you should hand somebody the first time they walk into the chapel, because they're just like, I can't even follow this missal, and now I have to get a new wardrobe. Like, what's going on here? Right. Okay. Okay. Next one, private revelation. This is going to make me the most enemies here. This is not just a problem with traditional Catholicism. This is a problem in Catholicism in general. It's a huge problem in the charismatic renewal with the Medjugorje obsession, regardless of the controversy around Medjugorje, just this idea that you would look to a private revelation for basically daily messages. I'm going to look up the verse here, though, but I believe, here it is. Well, this is, forgive me, this is not the Dewey Reams translation. And that, again, is going to get me in trouble because it's the first one that came up on.
Question is, which one is it?
This is the New International Version. It just came up on.
Anathema shit, man. Yeah.
I know. Well, it's that like Bible Hub. It's just, you look up the verse and it comes out. There probably is a Dewey Reams if I go down far enough or something. But anyway, the point is, it says, a wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but none will be given except the sign of Jonah. Okay, so a wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign. Call me crazy, but that sounds like a wicked and an adulterous generation looks for a sign. That does not mean that we don't ever listen to private revelations. That would be absurd. There are approved private revelations for a reason. But even there, an obsession with private revelations is dangerous, is extremely dangerous. And here's why, in my opinion. You and I, we all have basically no idea how we're supposed to interpret private revelations. The book of Revelation is mainly metaphorical. There will be an end times. There will be. I just read Taylor Marshall's book. By the way, it is incredible, everybody. I mean, you need to buy it. It's actually, I mean, Taylor Marshall is at his best with biblical commentary. It's an exceptional book, and he goes through the greatest theologians in the church's history on interpreting literally every verse of every passage, I should say, of that book of the Bible, of Apocalypse. But even there, 90% is metaphor. It refers to things that will come, but the explanations of them are in some ways completely up in the air. Final war. Okay, there'll be a final war. It talks about plagues and swords and things like that. There's no teaching of the church that says that we have to believe that there will literally be a sword fight. We don't use swords anymore. That'd be cool, but we don't use swords anymore. Talking about the land beast, standing with foot in the water. I mean, these are clearly metaphors. So there's one revelation or one private, Blessed Aiello. What's the name? Blessed Aiello. Elena Aiello. I'm going to find the quote there, and it's about Rome, read something, is it Russia and Vatican. Let me see here. And this is one that, here it is. Okay. This is one that I'm always shown. Okay. And when I say that I believe, again, this is debatable. When I say things like, I think that, Pope Francis's consecration of Russia was valid. One of the first examples of why I'm a complete and utter modernist for even uttering such a blasphemy, okay, is this verse right here. And it is, here it is here. Here we go. In these tragic hours, the world has need of prayers and penance. You know what? Maybe I don't have to share it. It's fine. In these tragic hours, the world has need of prayers and penance because the Pope, the priests, and the church are in danger. If we do not pray, Russia will march upon all Europe and particularly upon Italy, bringing much more ruin and havoc. Hence, the priests must be in the front line of defense of the church by example of and sanctity in life. Okay, so here's what I'm always told. I'm only ever told this first part. And here's the quote again. In these tragic hours, Russia will march upon all Europe. So I'm told that because Fatima has to do with Russia, which obviously it does, that this is a linked prophecy because it comes after. And if we don't see Russia literally marching upon Europe and destroying Rome, then this prophecy has not been fulfilled. So we have to wait for that to happen before Fatima can be fulfilled. I get the logic of it. But how about this was before the Second Vatican Council and Russia did march on Rome? I mean, this is just one interpretation. Mm-hmm. What happened at the Second Vatican Council? Russian Orthodox bishops, which were KGB bishops, came to the council and they convinced, through their dialogues with each other, they were convinced not to condemn communism. And since then, we've been dealing with the errors of Russia in the church in an extraordinary way. I mean, that's a completely valid interpretation because it's a private revelation. Right. You know, and she goes on about how the priests must be in the front line of defense of the church by example of sanctity in life. Well, why doesn't it say they should be on the front line with AK-47s and grenades? Because it's an actual literal war. Because she doesn't even see it that way, at least as far as I can tell from this prophecy. Okay. But I'm shown just a piece of this by people. And it's, well, it has to be about a real war. And it's like, no, it doesn't, because 99% of private revelations in history have been metaphorical, and they tell a true message with an allegorical or imagistic story. So I think diving into private revelations all the time is extremely dangerous because you have no idea how to interpret it. And if you interpret it wrongly, it can create a level of negative emotion, anxiety, which ultimately can lead to almost, again, Christ talks about a wicked and adulterous generation, but also a type of despair, which is against the virtue of hope. And we need to hold that because it's one of the theological virtues. What say you?
Yeah. Most of these, you don't even know what you don't know about prophecy. You know, right. I've heard people try to, based off prophecy and based off things like the 7 ages of the church, things like this, right? Try to predict, people I respect too, try to predict when a chastisement's going to be or when the end times are going to be by like the year. And you just end up sounding like one of those people on the street corner, you know? And it's I think that's one of those things that kind of turns people off pretty easily. The best, and I had a priest explain to me once that this hyper, it needs to be like a war, for instance, like another world war or something like that. Fine, yes. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. But I've had this seems to be true, that more of our chastisements as people after the incarnation were always less physical than they were spiritual now, since Christ entered man. A lot of our problems now, a lot of our problems and a lot of our victories are not as external as they were in the Old Testament. Everybody, in that sense, the Spirit of God is in man. The best example of this kind of, I don't want to call it panic, but this sort of scrupulosity over private revelation and things like that is people will pretty easily get worried about the 3 days of darkness, for instance, and how that's going to shake out. And and to the point where it's like, well, what do I do? Do I get these candles? Do I bless it in this way? So on and so forth. And it's just like you can't even begin to guess what half of the stuff means. So it's like, and if it's as bad as you think it's going to be, like if you believe in God, you believe in providence, right? You know what I mean? And if you're a faithful Catholic, just roll with it. You know what I mean? Keep doing what you're going to do because it's going to happen anyway. You know,
if you have blessed beeswax candles, that's all you can do. Right. Because I mean, there's literally nothing you can do. It says, I mean, think about all the, and also This is where the new atheist types are able to level effective, even though petty jabs at religion. Because they'll say, well, God is not petty. He wouldn't care about they'll always say about pelvic issues, right? Because they're all perverts. They're all atheists because they want to be, watching porn basically. And that's true. That is pretty much the crux of atheism, by the way, is pornography. And if you're
Fulton
yellow,
Sheen, said it's not the it's not the creed, it's the commandments. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
And but you're a modernist if you like Fulton Sheen, because
forget it. Yeah,
of course, because 99.9% of his work was traditional, but he said some things late in life that were debatably not so much. So therefore, he should be thrown into the fire, as they say on the traditional. Literally, the other day, a guy on traditional Catholic Twitter, he said Fulton Sheen died. What he at the end of his life, he was a dyed-in-the-wool liberal, and died that way. And I said, you were at his bedside and you can read his soul? I mean, that sort of statement is absurd. Like I can't say that about anybody. I can't say that about anyone unless while they're dying, they're like, hi, I am a liberal. And then they have their last,
it's got to be at the moment, because I mean the church has always held traditionally that the final moments before your death are some of the most mysterious of your whole life, and so much is going on that you just look, man. I mean, whoever it is, just plead ignorance. You know what I mean? And just hope for God's mercy, and give them the benefit. Give them the benefit. I mean, and Fulton Sheen especially deserves more than that because of all.
Well, you look at a man's life and you say, well, 99.9% of the way he wrote and lived, it was this way. It's like, well, you should probably interpret that anomaly in light of that.
Right, and that's basically that's what I was getting at. Like, he's earned the benefit of the doubt for that stuff.
Everyone deserves that. Right. It's like, he's a good man. If he said that, I should probably find out why he said that. Rather, and this is a whole. So
we could do another show on that.
We could do another show on that because we have 10 with 5, maybe 15 minutes left. So, but as you were talking about these, as we were talking about this whole private revelation thing, here's another interesting thing from this same prophecy. Okay, because traditional Catholics, generally speaking, they're not really fans of divine mercy, which is a whole other show. But I don't really care to do that show, to be honest. But nonetheless, they're usually not a fan of it. Well, if you read this prophecy by Blessed Elena Aiello, excuse me. When you read it, she goes on to say, this is in 1960, the hour of the justice of God is close and will be terrible. Tremendous scourges are impending over the world, and various nations are struck by epidemics, famines, great earthquakes, terrific hurricanes with overflowing rivers and seas, which bring ruin and death. So here's a problem. This is 1960. None of that happened to that degree. I mean, I'm sure it did happen in a way, but none of it happened to a degree where it's like you open up the history books about this is August 1960. The hour of justice is close. Does she mean literal hour? Does she mean hour as in we're in an era of it? Does she mean it's going to happen in a month or two? Again, none of that's defined. But if it does mean very soon after that, well, in my history books, I don't read about all this stuff happening exactly in that manner. But she goes on to say, if the people do not recognize in these scourges of nature the warnings of divine mercy, and do not return to God with truly Christian living, another terrible war will come from the east to the west. Russia with her secret armies will battle America, will overrun Europe. The river Rhine will be overflowing with corpses and blood. Italy also will be harassed by a great revolution, and the Pope will suffer terribly. None of that happened. But in a sense, I would say that it did, metaphorically. So if I wanted to actually give her the benefit of the doubt, it did happen metaphorically. But the river of the Rhine did not run with corpses, unless we're talking about metaphor. And I was talking to a guy yesterday who lived in Germany for 15 years, converted to Catholicism in Germany. He's a Canadian guy. Converted from reading about Catholicism, went and found out that it was a complete, homo heresy festival in Germany, and then found a Latin mass, and it helped him not leave the church. But I would say metaphorically, that's I can get on board with this prophecy as a metaphor, because it all makes perfect sense as a metaphor. The 1960, that's just before the Second Vatican Council. Talk about a famine. but there's a famine after that. There's a famine of faith. Talk about an earthquake, talk about earth-shattering things. It all happened in the church. And she mentions the Rhine. That's Germany, right? Overflowing with corpses and blood. Germany is basically the hotbed of heresy in our day and age. So anyway, I'm sorry to go on so much about this one, but I'm just saying, here's one of those prophecies that is so important to so many traditionalists who are really deep into private revelation. And it makes literally no sense in a literal sense because none of it's come true. It makes perfect sense in a metaphorical sense because in a sense that's all come true. Which just lends it to our understanding of you can interpret a revelation in 100 different ways. And it usually is going to make more sense if they're metaphorical. And if you're not careful, you start to sound like Chicken Little. The sky is falling. And it's funny, I tweeted something yesterday about, are we in the food shortages yet? Because I've been told we're going to have food shortages since like summer of 2020. And it may happen. I'm sure at some point in history, there will be a food shortage. And everyone who's been saying there's been a food shortage for 15 years will say, I told you. And it's like, you were wrong for 14 and a half years. Just like there will be an end times. So everyone who predicts the end times will eventually be right about the end times. But it's like, they're not,
necessarily. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm also, one guy tweeted, he replied, I'm still waiting for Y2K to happen. We start sounding like that if we go too deep into private revelations. Anyway, I think we've beat the drum on that enough, unless you have anything to add on that front.
No, it's true. And, I was reading the novel Father Elijah, which is quite good. And he's talking about the character and the story he's talking about, and it's true in this case. The book of Apocalypse specifically. Like, time isn't even linear in the apocalypse. You know what I mean? You're thinking with the mind of Scripture. There is not thinking the way we normally do, cause and effect. It's just a completely different paradigm. So
that's right. Okay, my next one. This might be our last one we can do. Being black-pilled. Okay, so let's qualify here. Everyone knows the scene from The Matrix, or at least know the term being red-pilled. Nothing wrong with being red-pilled. It's a good thing. Basically, you realize you've been lied to. So being a traditionalist, you are necessarily red-pilled in the sense that you recognize that you've been sold a bill of goods. It is a revelation. It is an apocalypse in the sense that there's a veil pulled. It's scripturally, there's scales pulled off your eyes and you see things for the first time. This is the experience of being red-pilled. Perfect. I remember when I first discovered, the Society of St. Pius X, being the inquisitive type that I am, I went right to the source documents and read like books written by Lefebvre or about or with the actual documents, Michael Davies type things. And I'm reading these things and I'm going, this is literally nothing like what my bishop has said. This is nothing like, Catholic, magazine.com or whatever has said. That's completely nonsense. But I was told by a priest, I was told by my parish priest at the time that you can't go to the SSPX because they're like the Lutherans with no sacraments. I was told by the former head of vocations in my diocese that they're in full schism like the Orthodox, which begs the question if there's a partial schism, which again gets anyway. I was told by a female catechist that they don't believe there's been a pope since Pope Pius X. So they're really sedes, but that's why they call them. That was an interesting one. They are sedes to the max, and they're Pius X sedes. And I was like, that's not true. And I was told by a priest who celebrates traditional mass, this was all in the span of a year and a half, that you can't go there. They're not in schism, but they're not in union. I was like, okay, so they're part of the church, but they're not part of the church. That's like a Schrodinger's cat nonsense. And then I was told by the vicar of my diocese that they're under no penalty. They are not in schism, but the reason that they're not in union is because they don't accept all the doctrines of the church. And I was told by an Opus Dei priest that they're not in the church because they don't accept the doctrine of religious liberty. And what's wrong with your camera there?
No, it's not the camera. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
The
okay.
Oh, my phone is dying.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Good.
And anyway, so all these things together, and I was just like, I was very much red-pilled, is my point. Like I went to the source and I realized I had been lied to by everyone about it. So red pilling is necessarily a part of not just being a traditionalist, but just kind of in the world. You know,
Yeah.
I've been recently red pilled on exercise. I found high intensity training, and it was Dorian Yates's method, and it was anyway, it's amazing. It's incredible. And I'm like, I can work out 50% or 80% less of the time and get more results, and it's not a hoax, and whatever. I was like, wow, and it makes perfect sense. We've been red pilled on viruses. We'll stop so we can stay on YouTube. You know, so red pilling is good, but when you take so many red pills that you then start to be, pardon?
Red pill poisoning.
Red pill, you choke on them, and you get black pilled to the point of, and this is where I've had so many problems with my traditionalist friends, not in real life, but sort of an internet perspective. They'll cast doubt on everything, but not themselves. So it leads to this. It leads to this very inconsistent logic of you're being lied to about everything. Everything is a psyop. Everything's going to actually go wrong. Everything that they say is the opposite. And it's like, well, why should I believe you then? You know, you're just as bad as them, unless you have some infallible charism. And I didn't know that you were some special prophet, you know, picked by God to save the world. Anyway, too many red pills leads to a type of Gnosticism, to be honest, and an unhealthy skepticism where you doubt even basic truths. What do you think?
Yeah, it's I've seen a lot of this, and I think the best. So, okay, if you're not born into this, what I call La Cosa Nostra, this thing of ours, if you're not, because it's so peculiar. If you're not born into it, what it does, it requires a lot of undoing of old ideas. I mean, I went to, I live out here in New York. I went to public school, K through 12, and I basically had to, from the time I became interested in Catholicism and Christianity, I basically had to unlearn everything that I had learned in order to get to the point, the philosophical point where I'm at now, where accepting Catholicism. But the problem is I think people, as that starts to happen, you become cognizant of the fact that you were lied to significantly, and that you're continuously being lied to. Like, make no mistake about it. Everybody is lying to you all the time. In government, in the church, it's true. But so what are you going to do about it?
Yes.
Are you just going to say resistance is futile, for your own self? I see this a lot. I see this in a lot of areas. One of the religion, politics, dating. Believe it or not, people are just like, people are just like the whole thing. Like, they want to basically throw in the towel institutionally.
That's MGTOW.
Correct.
That's men going their own way. It's like, yes, feminism's bad, but now rejecting like the female species as a whole is kind of an overcorrection.
Well, yeah, and it ends up, and that's exactly what it is. It's an overcorrection, and you end up throwing, well, in that case, quite literally throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But you do that in the church, and you do that in church and state too, by just it's basically inertia. So which extends to everything in life. So basically, there's no such thing like stasis is a myth. You can't just be sedentary. That's impossible.
Yeah.
You're either going forward or you're going backwards at all times. So if you are in a situation of paralysis by analysis because you OD'd on red pills, and you're just sitting there saying what's the use, and quite literally paralyzed, you're not progressing in any sense. You are going backwards.
That's right. Yeah.
You need to pursue the point is that you constantly need to be. I hate to sound Pelagian, but you constantly need to be in pursuit of the transcendentals, the good, the true, the beautiful.
That's right. And you and I are both Platonists, and you and I are both Platonists, so we love. I'm not like a trained. I'm just saying I really enjoy Platonic philosophy because I'm more of an Augustinian. Um, that being said, I know that when I read Plato's allegory of the cave, the point is to come out of the cave, not to then think that everything else for the rest of time is another cave. In Plato's allegory of the cave, people that don't know, it's an amazing allegory. It's basically the theme of the Matrix without the Buddhism nonsense put in that the authors who ended up becoming transgenders ended up doing. Anyway, the Wojciechowski brothers or whatever the names are. But the person is shackled. He just sees shadows of fake things by artificial light, and he can't move because he's been sitting that way his whole life. His neck is stiff. It's this whole process of conversion and the pain that you have to go through, and then eventually he gets out of the cave and he can see real light and real things and real forms, and then eventually he gets to the point where he can not only see the things lit up by the light, but he can look at the light and he can contemplate the light, the sun itself, which is about, metaphorically, we could say that's also like contemplating the divine goodness, because we see that animates all things. And then from there, he's able to see the forms that this divine creator has used as the sort of impetus for all things. So we can then contemplate not just what's the right thing to do this in the situation, but what is virtue itself, and this is where we get this Platonic philosophy. And I think it's very helpful. But you become a Gnostic. When you start to say, you become a Manichaean, really. And that's why that's actually, if you read the story of Augustine, read the novel about his life. It's actually a great way of learning exactly about him, but with fictional reading. And he is in this antiquity, and he gets gripped by Manichaeism, which is this Gnostic heresy, which is kind of a bastardization of Platonic philosophy mixed with the Christian heresy. And then the correction, and the idea in Manichaeism is that basically there's secret knowledge, and it's basically the Illuminati. It's like, you're the perfected, and the things no one else knows, and blah, blah, blah. And then the correction to that is actually him reading Plotinus, who is one of the major corrections. He had more, but one of the major corrections is him not reading Aristotle, but reading Plotinus, who is a Neoplatonist and distills Plato's ideas into basically, yes, you get out of the cave, but that's because you see the real hard and fast things and you trust in those immutable truths. When you get black-pilled to the point where you believe everything is a psyop, you almost can get to the point where you don't even believe in immutable truth, which is completely against the tradition of the church intellectually.
Yeah, it's the black pill is despair, basically, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately. And the black pill wants to make you think that your adversary is more powerful than he actually is.
That's exactly it. Good point.
I don't want to start naming people, but I think of guys like the
Italian guy in charge of medicine.
These guys, what the black pill does is it gives them the charism of omnipotence.
Yes.
Which they don't have. They're weak. They're weak men. Yeah. Ultimately. Yeah. What you have to do is so if they, if Fauci wants you to take the ouchie, right? That's yeah, fine. 70% of people did that, whatever. People aren't realizing how that strength comes from your own will and from the will of God, to just reject and just say, no, fine, I'm not going. Yeah. And who cares? Who cares that certain evil people are trying something? They're feckless, weak cowards.
They're always doing that.
Yeah, they've been doing that from the beginning of time.
Which
But
was how many years ago, though, so we can define it dogmatically?
yeah, right, yeah. So, but you were talking about Plato. Plato and Augustine had the heaviest hand in converting me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I would not have been here. I would not be sitting here talking to you if I had not at one point read the dialogues, especially the apology, and I had a very good philosophy 101 professor in community college before I went to get my bachelor's degree. She did a fair overview of the history of philosophy, started with Plato, ended with the existentialists, but in the beginning it was Plato, and we read, and she assigned 3 chapters of the Confessions, and
wow.
to discuss the problem of evil, and I was just, I read Plato, and I started reading the Confessions. This was 9 years ago, and I'm just enthralled at this point, and I just amazed and convinced of the idea of objective truth, and then you have Augustine's poetic work, and your heart, it just sets your heart on fire, and that's what happened. That's one thing leads to another, and I'm sitting here talking to you, but what you said about the allegory of decay is really important, because it does harken back to another point that you made about, well, okay, a new trad walks into a parish, right, and somebody hands them a book about how to dress, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not enough that they're at a liturgy where they don't, where it's completely new to them. That now, like you said, now they have to get this whole wardrobe. And the cave allegory works really well, because it's like, well, okay, in the Republic, when Plato's discussing this, the person who's coming out of the cave, the light hurts their eyes at first.
That's right. They're delicate.
The light's a good thing. The light, well, actually, no, not all. The light is not a good thing. It's the good thing. It's the
That's
good.
Right. Yeah.
And it's so easily, Platonism is so easily baptized, because I always would say, all you have to do in Platonism is drop one O out of good, and you have God. And it's basically the concept's conceptually the same. But these things that are good, modesty, whatever, you name it, if they're not slowly introduced, if your eyes are not thrust into the light, that person who's looks straight at the sun after being in the dark for however many years is going to recoil and go back into the darkness, because it's comfortable.
Yeah.
It has to be it's a really slow process, years and years and years. I'm still undergoing it. You still are, to an extent, I'm sure. It's just part of doing business,
Well, everybody's at their own pace too. I mean, I was a fast convert because I'm a lunatic. And what I mean by that is, like, I'm a choleric. Like, actually wish I lived in Braveheart, because I'm insane. So, as you do too. So, like, it's certain parts of it slow, but I was like, what's the craziest, hardest thing I can do? And I'll tick everybody off. I'll do that. Right. But that also has its problems, because I have problems that way. Whereas some people are more phlegmatic. They might take longer. It's fine. People have different ways of getting there. Okay. Well, I hope everyone is not in the dark after watching this show. I hope we've helped you get out of the cave, because Joe is here to help, and I think he's done a pretty good job. We've only scratched the surface. We're recording this. It'll air Saturday morning. So leave your comments in the comment section on YouTube. Not nasty ones, because that's annoying, and we'll just delete them anyway. But seriously, let us know what you want us to talk about, because we're planning on doing this about once a week. And this is what we wanted to start with. And maybe we'll have to talk about it more next time. Maybe there'll be more things that will come up. But let us know in the comments. Say, hey, we loved this part. We want to hear you talk about that more. And then we'll come back and we'll be here to help next week. Okay. So like this video, subscribe to this channel, click the links in the description. Check out Joe's work at 1 Peter 5, my work at Life Site and Crisis and 1 Peter 5 and everywhere else. And I think that's all there is. And we might have to call this show here to help Joe. I don't know. Okay. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless.